You know, it wasn't that long ago, in my mind anyway, I guess it depends on who's counting, but it wasn't that long ago to me when I was sitting in the seat that you're in right now. And, you know, I didn't really know which kind of an engineer I wanted to be. I was at Purdue, similar kind of a setup. I remember we had a experiential learning and a professional development series back, this was back in the late 80s. And, you know, it was all just kind of mystifying as what do I want to do? And then you get the homework assignments and you know, physics class, calculus and all this stuff. And it's really hard, you know. You have to put so many hours in. You see all these liberal arts majors over there throwing a frisbee on a nice day. Doesn't that make you mad? I mean, seriously. No, I'm just kidding. I guess liberal arts is okay. But, you know, I got a job with a company called Allied Signal. And because I had an engineering degree, they kind of put me in a position of leadership right away, which is kind of strange because I never really did any leadership at all. I just did math problems and physics problems, right? But the community of employers really values an engineering degree because of the critical thinking and problem-solving skills that you guys are developing. And they should, because they're very valuable skills. But what happened to me was I got, you know, put in a position of leadership, and then I quickly came to understand that I needed to learn the language of business. And so I suspect that might happen to many of you as well. And that's what I'm going to kind of talk about today, is how being an engineer or a computer scientist would work within the context of needing to understand the language of business and what that means. So, here's a quote. It starts off by saying this: the less money you have, the more likely someone will come at you with some scheme. Notice, by the way, that I have my hair slicked back today. I am, in fact, a finance professor, right? So, please ignore them. Always remember this: if it's a great deal, they're not going to share it with you. That comes from Mark Cuban, who is, of course, a self-made billionaire. Another quote comes from Warren Buffett. And this is one that, that I want to kind of hone in on a little bit. Warren Buffett says, it is better to be approximately right than precisely wrong. And one of the concepts as an engineer, now this goes back to when you were pre-K, all the way to now. Everybody has told you how smart you are, how good you are at math problems, how you could win math races at the board in 3rd and 4th grade. All these kinds of things. Your science project was fantastic at the science fair when you were in 6th grade. Remember that? And then all of a sudden, you know, Warren Buffett comes along, and of course he's pretty successful too, and he says stuff like this: it's better to be approximately right? Wait a minute. Did anybody tell Warren Buffett about galloping Gertie? How about that? You know? In engineering, of course you have to be technically correct. That's important. But there are times when in doing business and in doing your work, you're going to have to deal with imperfect information. And how are you going to do that? That's tough for us because as we go through school, we learn to problem solve and be exact over and over and over. And so dealing with imperfect information maybe isn't as comfortable for us as it is for the liberal arts majors who are out playing frisbee 6-7 hours a day. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to back up a little bit and tell you a little story about Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. So it's kind of a hot story these days. So Edison was born in 1847. He has been known and is known as America's greatest inventor. He's responsible for over 1,000 US patents and well over 2,000 patents worldwide. In fact, February 11th is National Inventors Day. Anybody want to guess why? That's his birthday, that's right. So he's got numerous illustrious awards. He took a lot of credit for a lot of stuff, right? Some of the key inventions that are credited to Mr. Edison include the phonograph, which may have been one of his big ones, electric generator, of course DC current, that was his big argument, the alkaline battery, and then we get the electric light bulb. That's the most famous one, right? I put an asterisk next to that, as well as the stock ticker. I got an asterisk next to that one too. Anybody want to guess why I have an asterisk next to the stock ticker invention? Well, first of all, he really didn't invent it. He just sort of improved it, which is kind of a theme for almost all inventions and all patented technologies. You stand on the shoulders of giants, and that's okay. So that was his first invention that was commercially viable. You know what his first invention was? It was a mechanical voting machine, because he sensed that people needed a mechanical voting machine to help make the process more fair and more complete. And the market didn't want it. So that was the first time Mr. Edison had to decide that he's going to do what the market wants from now on. He's going to invent things that the market's going to adopt. Why did he develop this mentality? Why did he develop this attitude? And this goes back to his childhood. He only attended school formally for a few weeks. He was kicked out of school. He was partially deaf from a disease he had early in childhood, and then he got kicked off of a train, which apparently hurt his hearing even more. But during his childhood, he had to develop a sense of entrepreneurial attitude, if you will, to sort of get things done in his world. So he started selling newspapers at age 12, and at the same time, he was a self-taught person. So he looked at a lot of scientific articles, and he read a lot of scientific journals and engineering journals, and he taught himself how the telegraph worked. So he became a telegraph operator at age 15, very entrepreneurially minded. Ended up going to Boston at age 22 to work for Western Union. And we just talked about his first invention being the voting machine, which wasn't commercially saleable. And then he made that universal stock quotation printer, which was purchased. And with that financial backing, he started his research laboratory at Menlo Park, New Jersey. So what's important here? He hired a person named Nikola Tesla. He also hired Henry Ford and other notable inventors throughout the time that he had his research lab at Menlo Park. So Nikola Tesla, of course, has become famous of late because of the Tesla Motor Company with Elon Musk at the helm. And he is credited with over 700 patents himself, including things like the radio, fluorescent lights, wireless communication, and AC motors. So if we compare the two, if we compare Edison and Tesla, we can see that they were both enormously successful, right? I mean, they're both, very successful inventors, very successful engineers. Edison and Tesla were different, though. They're both geniuses. They both received millions of dollars in funding throughout their lifetimes. The main difference was that Edison willingly sought capital investment, and he wanted to use the capital markets to his benefit, whereas Tesla did his inventiveness purely for the sake of science or engineering. Has anybody here ever sort of struggled with that dichotomy in their own mind? I don't expect you to answer that, but just, the idea that there's this pure science in engineering, and that doing something commercially may not be pure. It may not, right? So there's that dichotomy. So after the competition between AC and DC, and you guys probably know that Nikola Tesla was the founder, or he gets credit for AC current, whereas Edison gets credit for DC current. So there's this competition. And in our country, we generally have this win-loss, loser-winner mentality. It's a culture of winners and losers. And that particular idea or comment is going to tie back into emotional intelligence in a second when I get down that path. So what happened? Well, the results of Thomas Edison was he was funded by J.P. Morgan, who, by the way, bailed out the United States government 2 different times back in the turn of the 20th century, single-handedly. That's how rich J.P. Morgan was. So he teamed up with Edison, and they created a company called General Electric, which right now, at least as of 2016, stands as the 9th most desired place for engineers to work. So for engineering students, GE is a really cool place. They have 300,000 employees, lots of all kinds of engineers, and they have a lot of openings right now. So what happened with Tesla? Well, he created a company with George Westinghouse called Westinghouse, which is no longer around. It didn't work out in the end, but it was a very powerful company throughout the 20th century with lots of patents. I think 28,000 patents credited to Westinghouse Corporation. And now Elon Musk, of course, honors Nikola Tesla with the Tesla Motor Company, which is kind of ironic because Tesla cars run on DC, right? Not AC, so it's kind of interesting. So the difference, you know, when you look at the two, you can see that they both had a lot going for them. Edison died rich, and he's credited with all kinds of inventions and awards. Tesla died penniless. He didn't have anything to leave for his heirs, but did help forge the electric age. So there's a difference in the outcome, and a difference in the mentality probably shaped very early on in childhood in terms of which way they were going to be, commercially adoptive or commercially resistant. And it's a question that all of us have to ask ourselves. So how did Edison become so successful commercially? The spirit of entrepreneurism and what I will call a capital business acumen. So this is a chart that I think we need to focus on for a second. So what I'll call business languages, and I'll get into this in a second, this includes the content that you're learning now. Engineering content, coding, things like this. And for others, maybe they're in, liberal arts, maybe they're communications. That would be their content, their formal content. For a lawyer, arguments, understanding the law, that's their business language. For me, it's financial analytics right now and economics. That's my business language. That you can see. You can tell if somebody knows their stuff. You can just have a conversation with them. You can see how well they do when they're on a team that you're in doing a project. And that business language and the acumen that they share with you in that regard comes out. The professional attitude also comes out. And this is, I'll show you some characteristics of professional attitude and what they mean. But this is something that you can also sort of observe. You can see how people's professionalism is by observation. But the question is, how does somebody just kind of get to be so professional or have such an excellent professional attitude? Does it just happen, or do we learn it? Is it innate, or is it learned? And what I'm going to share with you today is that regardless of that truth, it can at least be partially modified. And that's going to be what I'm going to challenge you all with after we leave here tonight, is to go do a self-assessment and be honest with yourself. Do some critical assessment and then try to make some improvements. Nobody's perfect. Everybody can improve, no matter where we are. But what lies beneath these talents is this stuff called emotional intelligence. And now that's what I'm going to get into today. So, how does emotional intelligence affect performance with something like engineering? How would that happen? Well, here's what I'm talking about. Your work ethic. How do you act in your teams? What kinds of things do you say? Are you accepted in study groups? Is it because of you or because of them? Or a combination? And why? How do you dress? How is the tone of what you say? What words do you choose to use when you speak or not? Do you use silence a lot? Do you use eye contact when you talk with people? Or do you look away? These are all kinds of things that they're going to affect teamwork. And when we get back to Edison and Tesla, we see that there's nearly 2,000 US patents that they do get credit for together. But how many of those were really just their own work? Or was it the work of an entire lab of engineers and scientists working together? It's the latter, right? So teamwork is hugely important in how your business acumen is going to be with respect to the actual content of engineering. Okay. So other content of expertise, I put this stuff below, but it's all kind of the same. If we're going to operate within the capital structure, which is basically how the world is working, how the world goes around, then we have to say, okay, there needs to be some sort of a motivation for our science and engineering genius to be accepted or adopted in the system. And that's where we get into commerce or economics or capitalism or whatever you want to call it. So other forms of business language are financial analytics, marketing, strategy, entrepreneurism. And by the way, when I first got my job at Allied Signal years ago in the 90s, those languages there at the bottom of the screen are the ones I knew that I needed to know. I didn't learn it in engineering school. As a technical person, I knew a lot about physics and mechanics and things like that, but I didn't know anything about, variable WIP or the favorability of EBITDA or whatever. These are just sort of words that didn't mean anything. But I knew that when I started working in a business, I needed to learn that stuff. That's why I went back and got an MBA. That was the path I took. So getting back to that chart, what does it mean to have a professional attitude, or what does it mean to be professional? So I'm going to read through this list because I think these are important concepts for everybody to understand. Doing. What does it mean to do? How about to finish? You ever started a project? Now, we're all human. You ever started a project that you didn't finish it? And how did that make you feel? Negotiating. Maybe this isn't something that we do in engineering school a whole lot, but in business it happens all the time, and it's a skill. It can be done in a way that is effective, or it can be done in a way that's not so good. Leading. There's a lot of, that's almost like a buzzword, a cliche word, leading. What does it mean to lead? Does it mean you have to stand up and jump on the desk and scream at people and take over? No. There's all kinds of different ways. In sports, I study sports a lot, and there's an individual that used to coach the Indianapolis Colts named Tony Dungy. And I think about Tony Dungy from an emotional intelligence standpoint a lot. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but one of his sons, in an awful turn of events, committed suicide. And I still remember how Coach Dungy responded. He was really calm. Obviously, he was emotionally devastated, but he was very calm and collected in the wake of that event, which is something that I don't think I could do. I mean, I'll need to grow a lot more before I get to that point, I can assure you that. But these kinds of things, he was a quiet leader. It doesn't mean you have to stand up and be boisterous. It doesn't mean, leadership is something that you can look into, and you'll have your own style based on your own personality. It doesn't mean you have to take over. It means you have to be a value-added player in the team. Influencing. How do you effectively influence people in a team? Words are powerful. They can bring people together, or they can tear people down. Now listen, I know this isn't an easy sell for me today. I'm talking to a bunch of engineering majors, right? I mean, this stuff is kind of like a foreign language, right? I mean, if I was you, I'd be looking at me with one eyebrow raised all day long. But I'm telling you, I've been there. And in my experience, this stuff was important. And in time, you can learn it. And after you've been in the workforce for probably about 5 years, you're going to catch up on this stuff and pass everybody else because you've got the problem-solving skills. So you'll be in a really good situation. But this stuff is really important. The left-hand side is mostly information that you have to deal with yourself. And on the right-hand side, it speaks more to the environment around you and other people around you, and how you have to act, or how you might want to act or consider acting in the face of information around you and people around you. So, dealing with imperfect information on the bottom is really important, I think, for you guys as engineers, because, like I said, it's so. You've been used to having complete information because you have to do many of the projects that you do. But in business, when it becomes commercial, oftentimes time and money and energy have a limit. The cost of perfect information, anybody know what it is from an economics class that you might have had? It's infinity, in theory. So so you don't have time for that. You have to make a decision without having the perfect, complete picture. And at the end of the day, it's all about building relationships, which comes from all this other stuff. All right. So employers really value the professional attitude. I can tell you that in the 90s, unfortunately, what was kind of a big deal, we had a recession in the early 90s. And Jack Welch at GE was the leader of right-sizing. They used to do these things called downsizing and right-sizing, RIFs, you may have heard that phrase, a reduction in force. I've never seen somebody let go because of a lack of technical competence. In my personal experience, I haven't seen everything. But the times I have seen young people, young engineers let go, it was because of the professional attitude components. Doing what you say you're going to do, being where you say you're going to be, saying things that are reflective and thoughtful and not reactive and inconsiderate, those kinds of things. All these professionalism traits really do matter to employers. Obviously, the technical components matter as well. I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying that underneath that, there's got to be this other element of acumen that you might want to think about developing. And by the way, like I said, everybody can improve. I don't care who you are. It doesn't matter where you stand or where you've been or how it's been with you. You can make improvements. Every single person can do so. So part of what we need to understand here is to have an open mind, and I'm going to try to sell you that one, and then work on your professional development through a series of steps that I'll outline for you. This part of the presentation is going to include, and Julie, you're going to give this to, okay. So you guys are going to get this presentation if you want it. And there are some websites that are referenced in the presentation that you can go to and you can learn about this in a more deep fashion. So the underpinning of professionalism is emotional intelligence. But before we get to that, who has a higher EQ, Spock or Sheldon? Oh, there's some fans. Okay. So I'm from like 1943, so I'm going with Spock, I don't even know about Sheldon. Honestly, I have no idea, but here's the thing. I think that when you look at both of these characters, they have incredible levels of emotional intelligence on some dimensions. And what makes it funny is that on other dimensions, and by the way, that's like one of the tricks of humor. By the way, Julie's really good at humor. You'll probably get to know that if you talk with her sometimes. But the reason why it's funny is because on other levels of emotional intelligence, they have none. So they're like brilliantly awesome in some ways, and in other ways they're like completely devoid of any emotional connection, and that's why it's funny. All right. So today's discussion about EQ. I'm going to give you a little bit of background, and there are several models. There's 3 iterations of emotional intelligence. I'll give you some details, and then I'll throw in a slide about happiness and how that fits into the entire discussion. And then some examples for 3 different jobs of the kinds of emotional characteristics that maybe employers would want to see in those jobs. But we can think about that, okay, because it may or may not be a comprehensive list. We'll talk about ways for improving emotional intelligence, and then I'll take questions if you have any at the end. So we're not going to go over this. Again, I'll let you guys look at this. One key to understand with this one is that the ability model, okay, there's several models. Emotional intelligence is sort of a new thing. And back, 50 years ago, IQ was the thing. Everybody talked about IQ, in psychology, it came from psychology. Did you guys all get your IQ tested when you were young? And they told you all you were all geniuses, so you're going to go be engineers, right? That's what happened. But EQ is kind of new. So the models are changing. But there's something to it. The ability model suggests that emotional abilities can be measured. And the main concepts there are self-awareness, emotional management, awareness of others, and then the development of relationships. Whereas The trait model suggests that your emotional intelligence is more fixed, and it's a function of your personality. And what's the truth? The truth is going to come out probably somewhere in the middle, but everybody can improve their emotional intelligence. So I'll let you guys look at these websites and others that are related to it on your own. So, again, the original 4 components of emotional intelligence are self-awareness, which is where it starts. And I have a story to tell you about that someplace. I'm not sure where I put it in here. I'm just going to go ahead and tell it to you now. So self-awareness, then managing emotions, understanding others, and managing relationships. So here's the story. So this is a true story. It's about me. It's when I was about 5 years old. I grew up for the first part of my life in a town called Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is about probably half the size of Chattanooga. It's in the north. It's close to, it's just south of Michigan. So I went to the park with my friends. I was 5. Back then, nobody cared what you did. It was fine. You could walk around your neighborhood. It's okay. So I ended up in this place called Winky Woods, which was super cool because you could climb trees, and it was awesome. Well, my friends went home, and they forgot I was in a tree. So I guess they just, I don't know if they're really my friends or not. I guess not. So all I know is I'm in a tree, and it's starting to get dark, and nobody was around. So I tried to find my way home, but I couldn't. I ended up going up to the street called Wayne Street, and then I found the ice cream shop that I was familiar with. It was on my way to school. I used to walk to school that way, and then I knew where I was. But then I was bawling too. Before I knew where I was, a car full of elderly ladies stopped and wanted to know if I needed help, and it freaked me out. I screamed bloody murder and ran, and then that's when I found the ice cream shop. That was so scary. I mean, I'm scarred from that. I'm serious. But here's what happened. When I got to the ice cream shop, I started walking home because I knew where I was then. And then I stopped and I looked around and I started thinking, I don't think this is real. I think this is all a trick. All these houses, they're not the houses I know. These are made out of paper mache. This is like aluminum foil with paint. I'm being tricked by the gods or whatever. And I was worried that it wasn't real. I had to see my dog. I asked my dad what his birthday was, and my sister, she always told me I was born at Kmart. Do you guys know what Kmart is? Anyway, so I asked my sister, where was I born? And she said, you were born at Kmart. And then I knew I was okay. But the self-awareness, it's what goes on inside our heads is a completely independent experience from the reality that we think is happening. And that's important to understand, okay? That's important no matter what you're doing. You are really alone inside your mind. You really are. We can kind of get that there are others around us and we're having this community experience, but at the end of the day, you're really alone inside your mind. And having the ability to understand that will help you with understanding your own self-awareness from an unbiased lens, which is really what you've got to do to be able to do this other stuff, which is manage your emotions, have some understanding for others. Basically, we're kind of the same. We're all about the same. So if we understand ourselves better, we can understand others better as well. And then, of course, the goal is forging relationships in the best way possible. That's what comes out of all of this. Because through that, we can then make progress on all fronts, right? Okay. Okay, so again, there's several models for emotional intelligence, and a more detailed model talks about effectiveness with, they break the self-awareness part into 2 pieces. Self-perception, which is kind of what I was talking about with the aluminum foil story, and then self-expression, which is more of a community relationship idea, okay, I know I'm talking to people, and so I'm gonna say things in a way that reflect how I'm feeling and how they might want to hear what I'm feeling. Okay? So use of emotional information, managing emotions is what it was called before, ability to cope with challenges, and then the development and maintenance of relationships, which are 2 different things. If you talk to somebody in sales, which would be more important, for instance, if you can just imagine, and you don't need to answer this out loud, but you can imagine the development or the maintenance of relationships. Well, it depends on the kind of sales you're doing. If it's somebody, your client is somebody that you visit once every 10 years, and the customer may change in that time frame, then development is probably more important than maintenance. But if it's somebody that you're going to call on every month and see how they're doing, like a service contract, then the maintenance of that relationship is probably more important, right? But from a sincerity standpoint, they're both important. So another punchline here is that the literature so far that comes out suggests that emotional intelligence, all those characteristics of professionalism, are twice as predictive of career success and life success as intellectual quotient, or just regular intelligence as we know it. So it's important stuff. So this model, you can't read it, but if you get the slides, you can look at it. It breaks down those characteristics in more finer grains, and it depicts that this is a continuum. So it's really hard to know if it starts with yourself or if it starts with the community, because you could argue it both ways, right? You could say, well, the community gives me feedback, and then I'm thinking differently about myself, or I perceive myself differently. Or you could say, well, I'm going to work on the way that I perceive myself, then I can interact in my community and forge better relationships. You could see it either way. So it's really a continuum that goes all around, and that's why that wheel was invented. So what does EQ measure? So the ability model, again, there's different models. The ability model suggests that you can measure it. And so, like I said before, each of us is sort of in a vacuum, by ourselves. And at the same time, we're sort of not in a vacuum. We're in this community. Like, we can see that there are others around us right now, and that'll always be the case. You're by yourself, and you're in your own mind, and then there's also other people around you, both that you agree with, that you think, or that you've had positive or negative experiences with in the past that come to your random access memory. Okay? So there are new people that come and go. There are rival leaders or rival team players that maybe you kind of rub elbows and it just kind of gets gritty. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, I don't know why. Sometimes they just have the personality thing. There are neighbors that maybe you never interact with or rarely interact with, but they're there. The suppliers of who you need, like, who are your suppliers? Your professors, they supply you with information. Your parents, your friends, they supply you with feedback, those kinds of things. Your bosses, when you get a job, those are people that you're going to interact with. Your colleagues, your peers, if you have customers. Is this still a word? Is it family? Did I say that right? Is that right? I'm out of my league here, guys. I don't know what that is, but it's like, I think I saw it on a commercial. Friends and family. So all those people are around you. And, even though they're seemingly far away. Now, there's one thing I want to tell you right now about this. Self-perception. How, what, and why do we express what we're going to express? Down at the bottom it says stress management, cope with challenges. You're gonna have challenges when you get to your jobs. And I'm gonna challenge that actually in a minute. You're going to have challenges. They're going to be emotional. They're going to be informative. And the question is, how are you going to respond? And here's an adage that came upon me when I was young and first burgeoning in my career. Here it is. Cool before correct. Right now, when you're doing your engineering assignments, you want to be correct, technically. But when you're working in a team environment or you're working for an employer, you've got to be cool. You've got to cool your jets. There could be new information. I was just talking with somebody about idea adoption. I think it's one of your professors. Professor Elliott? Yeah, so we were talking about how, when a parent tells a child something or when a professor tells a student something, how they may or may not believe it because they know them so well. It's kind of a filter. You filter out, Dad, yeah, okay, fine, Dad, thanks. But if somebody else says it, the idea is adopted. So idea adoption is an important concept. And so when I talked about how stress management is important, coping with challenges. I also think that there is something to it about dealing with good shocks of information, not just bad news. For instance, has anybody ever played Powerball? I want to see a show of hands. Be honest, I played. I'm a finance professor. I did it for an experiment to my students. I wasn't really wanting to win. I would. Okay. So, what if you won? What if you won like $500 million after tax? You know, it's like $800 million or some crazy number, and they take taxes. You get a lump sum check for $500 million. Have you heard the stories about super rich people that like blew it? They're everywhere, right? Sports stars, actors, whoever, that get this money in a shocking windfall all at once, and then proceed to make horrific decisions going forward. For instance, if you do win the lottery, you kind of got a problem, because you can't go down to the bank in downtown Chattanooga and like deposit $500 million. I mean, you could. But what if they get robbed like 10 minutes after you make the deposit? Wouldn't that be a nightmare? You'd be so mad. Because the federal government would give you $250,000. That's it. So when you have to deal with challenges, it's clear you're going to be stressed out. But what if you have to deal with shocks of good information as well? It could also cause you to stress out a little bit. So that's also something to watch out for. Okay. So when we do measurements, the ability model lets us measure our level of emotional intelligence across these characteristics. I'm talking to engineers, you guys like to measure things. So some scientist, Chris Gorell, came up with, he was a scientist and engineer working on emotions, and so what he did was, of course, come up with a periodic table. This is the kind of things that engineers do when we get messed around with emotions, right? So here's some fun up here, key insights. Love is an emotion on this periodic table of emotions. The molecular weight is pi. I thought that was kind of P-I and P-I-E, right? So the molecular weight of love is pi. Passion and depression are nuclearly unstable and heavy. Come on, guys, that was pretty fun. I thought that was a good one. I like this. Okay, here's a good one. Denial has no molecular weight. None. Denial, because he's in denial, right? The molecular weight of numbness is 0. And yet, it's the heaviest emotion in this periodic table at the same time. And finally, and I experienced this one all day today before I came here. This one's called dread, and I was dreading this because I'm going to give you guys an emotional lecture, and you guys are engineering and computer science students, so I was very dreadful about that. So the molecular weight of dread is 6 times 10 to the 24th, which of course represents the weight of the world, right? Now, I will take exception to that one because although I give the author here credit for this fantastic periodic table of emotions, we know that 6 times 10 to the 24th is measured in kilograms, not pounds, so it's actually not weight, it's mass. So, thank you for entertaining that slide. Interruption. All right. So, self-perception can be broken down to emotional self-awareness, understanding your own emotions. How are you feeling based on what's happening right now? Here's a good one, group energy. Right now, we're experiencing group energy. You guys are all sitting around, it's kind of a group thing, but you don't have to interact a whole lot. That's different than if you go to like a mixer or a networking session when you're expected to interact. Or if you want to get a job, you'll want to interact. So understanding your own self-awareness and understanding how your contributions are going to affect the group energy. Those are very important concepts. Here's one, self-regard. That's your level of confidence. And that's something that I'm going to tell you that the only way to understand this, now listen, I know you guys do problem solving all the time, because I did it too. And you don't have time to throw frisbees like the liberal arts majors do. So if, in fact, you do happen to feel a little bit nervous, or or a little bit uneasy when you're in a group setting, whether it's a networking event or a party, listen. Who cares? Don't worry about it. Just do it anyway. Because the way you're going to get that kind of confidence, which you definitely need, is through practice. You just have to do it. I know sometimes. Now, for those of you that do party and you're able to get straight A's in all your classes, my hat's off to you. That's great. I had trouble doing that. I couldn't do that. It was too much for me. I had to focus on my homework, and then my days of socializing were later. So I was a little behind the curve myself. But you can do it through practice. You just have to force yourself to get out there and practice. And remember this, if it's a networking event, that's important. But if it's a party, that's just practice. So you're going to get this group effect, social confidence. It'll happen. You just have to give yourself a chance. Just a little bit at a time. Every iteration that you do is going to increase it. And I'm not saying you're like that. I'm just saying I'm kind of projecting myself here and my peers. It's kind of an introverted world in a way, because you have to do this stuff right. You don't want bridges falling down. You don't want buildings falling down. Electricity has to work, right? This is serious stuff. But the social confidence will come with practice. So self-regard, very important. Self-actualization comes from a continuous development of yourself, and you guys clearly do that, because you're putting in an awful lot of work for the undergraduate degree that you're getting. So that's something you're going to score high on, I'm sure. Self-expression, the ability to say how you feel. That's kind of straightforward. Assertiveness, standing up for yourself effectively, and independence, creating ideas by cognition rather than following or copying. Now, at first, maybe you can do following and you can do copying, but eventually you're going to want to, through your own self-actualization, learn to do things on your own or come up with a novel way of doing it. And here's the idea. Sometimes when you do things like this, you might have an idea, but it seems so far afield that you're a little bit hesitant to bring it forward because it'll sound interesting, right? So that's a balance that you're going to have with yourself in your own mind about what you want to share and what you want to keep inside. But creating independence is important. All right, moving along here. Empathy is a big one. I can't tell you how important this is. All this means, really, is listening. And I'm still learning this too, quite admittedly. This is not easy, because what I tend to do is want to solve problems. Like whenever I hear somebody telling me a problem, my gut reaction, and this goes back to, I don't know when, I guess when I was like 5 or 6, I want to solve it, because I think that's helpful. I'm good at solving problems. I will solve it. Sometimes that's the exact wrong thing to do, because whoever's on the receiving end of that feels judged and inferior and other things that aren't helpful. So empathy is it's like a discipline. And I'm talking here, and I'm not even very good at it. I'll admit that. I need to improve this. But everybody can improve always. Trying to force yourself to just listen and understand, seek to understand the other party. That's going to be so helpful if you can do that. And maybe you can even time yourself. Like, I've started doing that. Like, I'll look at my watch and just say, okay, I'm not going to give advice for 5 full minutes. That's really hard for me. I'm telling you. 5 minutes is a long time. So that's important, empathy. It turns out, if you help others, social responsibility, if you help others, it increases your emotional intelligence. So all this stuff about philanthropy that universities set up to do is done so with wisdom. It turns out that those things go hand in hand. And of course, at the end of the day, we want to drive our interpersonal relationships as high as possible. Sincere relationships. Okay, decision making. Problem solving is something that we probably are going to do well. Reality testing is this idea that reality, I'm going to give you an example. In a business meeting at a company where there's, say, a problem, we're doing capital budgeting, we have 4 or 5 different projects, and we're going to choose one of them. And maybe there are 10 people in this meeting, and 5 different people have spoken up, and each one of them wants to choose a different project and explains why. How can that be? If everybody's really smart And everybody that is speaking up is choosing a mutually exclusive, different project as the answer or the solution. How's that even possible? Well, the reason is this reality test element. People see the world from different points of view, and we have to understand that. It kind of ties back into the self-awareness issue. This is where empathy comes into. You back up and listen. And also, this is where that win-lose mentality that plagued Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, win-lose mentality, competitive mentality. There's all these buzzwords in business now called co-opetition. You've ever heard of co-opetition? It's really hard to do, especially when you get this grainy rubbing elbows thing going on where people just don't want to listen anymore because of the recent past experiences interpersonally. You guys have to challenge yourself to rise above that and just listen and try to make progress. And oftentimes the best solution are going to be borrowing and begging bits and pieces of other people's ideas and assembling it together. Sometimes that doesn't work and sometimes it does. But this idea of what is the reality that we live in is a really good question, and that deserves some thought. Controlling impulses, of course, that's important. And optimizing in spite of not having perfect information. So at the end of the day, we have to make a choice because time is money, and all we have is time and energy, guys. That's all we've got. Okay. Stress management. Being structured is important. Being scheduled and structured, but also being able to flex is important. Being able to deal with negative and positive shocks. We talked about that before. And then I want to talk about this one: being optimistic. This will to power idea. At some point, I wrote something down here I wanted to share with you guys. I'm not sure where it is. Must have skipped over it, so I'm going to get back to it. So, being optimistic and this will to power idea, it's almost like if you take Rocky Balboa, Oprah Winfrey, Gandhi, and somebody else that you think is really good, and merge them all together. Okay, like maybe Albert Einstein, throw him in there too. Merge that together and you have to be optimistic no matter what the situation. You can think of all kinds, okay, let's talk about, and this is probably a good time right now to think about, for instance, what happened in Las Vegas today. I don't know if you guys heard about it. Okay, so in the wake of something like that, which we've heard about all too often recently, it's really discouraging, right? We have got to remain optimistic anyway. We have to. So on that note, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a moment of silence in reverence for what happened in Las Vegas and what's been happening recently in other places. So I'm just going to have a moment of silence right now. Thank you for that. So, I think Nietzsche said it. There's this idea that you will to power. You go inside your own mind and you understand what you can control, what you can't control, and then you just literally make it happen. That's that Rocky Balboa component, the can-do attitude. Employers love that, and you're going to love that. You probably already do that, it's my guess. All right, so what about happiness? This idea of feeling satisfied, enjoying life, an indicator of overall well-being. It's not included in EQ, but there are some correlates. The correlates are self-regard, so people who have a lot of confidence, people who are optimistic, are good at developing and maintaining positive interpersonal relationships and have a tendency to self-actualize. They tend to be, quote, happy, which that's not terribly shocking, right? That makes sense. All right. So, now, we saw that there are some correlates of emotional intelligence to happiness. What about correlates to certain jobs? So what kind of emotional intelligence capabilities would we want to see for somebody in customer service or sales? Well, it turns out self-regard, which is confidence, assertiveness, stress tolerance, interpersonal relationships, self-actualization, and empathy are all important in sales. So we can think about that, right? We could say, well, they've got to have a lot of confidence to be able to go up and cold call people and try to sell them something. You got to have some moxie for that. Assertiveness, you've got to be able to step in there and assert yourself, okay? It's kind of related. Have the tolerance to have somebody say no and be respectful about it and move on about your day. And they get no a lot. For those of you who are going to go into technical sales, anybody want to go into technical sales? Is that an outlet that anybody wants? You guys all want to be design engineers, right? And that's like, I'm going to work for NASA. That's what I wanted to do. It'd be awesome. But whatever you do, one thing is that any job you do, even if you're a design engineer at NASA, you're still going to be in sales. You're still going to have those elements of customer service, even if you're doing that. They tie into every different kind of a position in an organization. Okay, so let's look at another one. And I appreciate you guys coming here today. I want to tell you that. I think that it's really good that you came. I know this is not, as fun as like nuclear engineering or something. If I was, 20 years old, I wouldn't want to come to this. So I guess you did a good job getting them to come. But I really appreciate you being here. I want to tell you that. Because I know I wish I would have heard this when I was in your shoes. I really do. I wish I would have had somebody tell me all this stuff before I went out. I learned it, maybe, partly. I'm still learning. Of course, we all are. Okay, so what about for an engineer? What kind of emotional intelligence skills are important? Self-actualization, problem solving, so doing your homework, right? Figuring it out. Reality testing, understanding what the problem is or what's going on, that's important. Optimism, because sometimes it probably seems really difficult, some of the challenges that you face as an engineer. Some of the problems are so hard. Tolerance for stress. You guys have an examination. How much stress is that? I kind of remember those days. It's pretty stressful stuff. I think that's why you do it when you're relatively young. I don't think I could do it now. I'm just saying. Flexibility, assertiveness, independence, empathy, and interpersonal relationships. There's probably a lot more, but there's a lot that you're going to have to do that would suggest emotional competence and emotional intelligence when you get out there in the workplace. For business leaders, and I teach in an MBA program at my college, and we have, I think, the highest concentration of mechanical engineers in the country per capita in the town that I teach in. So a lot of the MBA students are engineering majors or engineers that work usually at a place called Cummins. And they want to go on and become a manager in a company. They've done well as an engineer. They've worked for maybe 3 to 7 years or so, and the company is really impressed with them, and they want to put them on a fast track for management. So oftentimes I'll see them in the classroom to become business leaders. So if that's what you want to do, what are the emotional intelligence characteristics that you'd want to see? Assertiveness, interpersonal relationships, confidence or self-regard, emotional self-awareness, self-actualization, and empathy. Now listen, it doesn't mean that the other ones aren't important. These are just the ones that researchers that have looked at this have highlighted to say that these are a little bit more important than the other ones. Now they're all important no matter what job you have. But some just tend to come to the fore a little bit more than others. Okay. So, back to the wheel. There is no top or bottom. It's all a continuum. And, however, some of these characteristics may seem, I thought so anyway, when I first heard about this, they may seem to be in opposition of one another. Let me give you an example. Interpersonal relationship development versus independence. How can those be consistent? Do you want me to be good at developing relationships, or do you want me to be independent? And does anybody have a thought about that? The answer is that they're both independent. You want to have a lot of each. They're not in competition with one another. They work together. You're either high or low on those scales. And sometimes when you're out of balance, there's two levels. There's, are you out of balance is one. And two is, do you have a lot of all of them or any of them? So there's the balance part and there's the intensity or the level part. So ideally, what you want is to have a lot of all of them, right? So you want to be highly independent and highly effective at the development and maintenance of interpersonal relationships. Let me give you another one. Assertiveness versus flexibility. What do you want me to do? Be assertive, or do you want me to just be flexible and like roll over? So again, the idea there is if you have a lot of skill in being flexible and you have a lot of skill in being assertive, you can, and then you're really self-aware and you can manage your emotions. You can understand the situation, understand the conversation, and know when, like Kenny Rogers says, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and know when to run. Right? You've got to know when to say what and why and how and all that. That's where these characteristics come in. Here's another one. Emotional expression versus stress tolerance. So if you're stressed out, you might say a bunch of stuff that would be emotionally expressive. That's probably fair. But maybe it's not like the right things, right? So if you're really stressed out, okay, like let me give you an example. Road rage. Anybody ever had road rage? Or anybody ever seen road rage? Everybody smiling, so. Okay, so there's an example of where you're stressed out. Because look, you don't want to crash your car. It's kind of a serious thing, right? There's people involved, there's a lot of money involved. But then there's the emotional expression part, right? So there's that. Here's another one. Empathy versus self-regard. So if you have a lot of self-regard, you may not want to just sit there and listen to somebody that maybe you think you don't respect based on the reality test that you've conducted, based on recent or far-reaching history of experiences with whoever this person is. So there's that tension of being empathetic when you don't want to be, and having regard for yourself and your time and your energy and your resources. So that's just an idea of how these models work out. Okay, now what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to have you do an assignment. It's not going to turn it in or anything. But you're going to do these emotional intelligence examinations on your own, and they're free. And you're going to end up, now I want you to be honest about the way that you answer the questions. You don't have to be right. You don't have to do well. What you want to do is you want to find out the areas where you want to focus on for improvement. Okay? That's the whole point of doing this. So you go through these examinations, you find out those areas on the characteristics on the wheel and in the slides that you think maybe you need to, shore up. Find out what your strengths are, what you're going to improve, and then you're going to put in an action plan for emotional improvement, emotional intelligence improvement. And so one way of doing it is through this idea of goal setting called SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, they're action-oriented, attainable, realistic, and timely. So there's a video that explains that if you want to go into that. So the other important point, though, is that you only want it, like let's say you've got like 5 or 6 areas that you want to improve on. Pick 2, really. You don't want to, I think you pick 2 and make an action plan that's, using the SMART system and do something that improves those 2 areas for 30 days. Every day for 30 days, just a few minutes a day. And then once you're used to that, then go back to your list, get the next 2 on the list, keep practicing the first 2, and add the second 2 to it. That's how you'll actually make a noticeable improvement in your emotional intelligence. So, in general, you want to believe you can do it. You've got to have an open mind to this. So you want to believe you can do it. Be sincere when you do these assessments, because like whenever you take an IQ test, it's really fun to score like 144, right? I feel so good about myself. Look how smart I am. I'm so awesome. No, I don't have to do anything. Look how cool I am. But like on this one, it doesn't matter. What you want to find out is the weak spot, because that's how you're going to make progress. So just if you're good, that's great. But just be honest with yourself. This is just for you, okay? Okay. So keep practicing, then develop a new goal. Keep doing that until you're happy with how things are going. Improving self-awareness generally, okay, now those are the specific ways, but generally, to improve self-awareness, Meditate, asking the following questions. What am I trying to achieve? What is it that I'm doing that's working? What's not working? Just write this stuff down. Journal the ideas that you get from this meditation. What am I doing that's slowing me down? What can I do to change? Now, meditation, here's what this means. Meditation means you're going to go somewhere quiet, that's comfortable, and you're going to think about these questions for like 5 minutes. I guarantee you it's going to be a long 5 minutes. And then try to work up to 10 minutes. That's what I'm talking about. It's shown to improve your ability to handle emotional stress and to be more self-aware. Anybody know what the psychometric tests are? Do you guys do those? The MBTI, PI? First year, okay. So take the psychometric tests, and you can, according to the trait model of emotional intelligence, the psychometric tests are going to tell you, okay, this is kind of how I am. You know, like MBTI, I'm an extrovert or an introvert. I'm a judger or perceiver. Those kind of feeler or a thinker. If you know who you are to start off with, from the psychometric analysis standpoint, you're going to have an easier time trying to come to grips with who you are and how to manage your emotions. Okay, another key point here is ask your trusted friends and mentors in your life to give you feedback. And when you go to your job, this is really important. You're going to not want to be afraid, okay, to go to your boss and speak very sincerely and very respectfully and just ask them for feedback before they tell you feedback. You want to go seek the feedback out first, and then be willing to make the changes. That's critical. If you do that, they're going to love you, okay? That's really important. So you go seek them out and ask them, hey, how am I doing? What can I do? Are there things that we need to work on, or things what do you really want me to focus on? You know, things like that. Be in communication and be sincere about it. Okay. Managing emotions better. Increase your emotional connections with others. Emotions are contagious. So if you want to become more upbeat, go to more parties. Now do your homework first, of course, but go to more parties. And don't do anything dumb. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying emotional contagion is good, and you want to be around positive people. Be fair and honor commitments. So if you say you're going to do something for somebody, do it. If you say you're going to pick somebody up at the airport, go pick them up, right? Cooperate with others. Okay, being disagreeable is a surefire way to hold you back. And I know for me, when I was early on in my career, I wanted, again, to problem solve. And so I didn't think of it as being disagreeable. But if I'm offering a different solution than what was just stated, in a sense, that is being disagreeable. So you got to watch out for that, okay? So be careful in how you phrase things. Be a mentor to people that need you. Be an inspiration. Focus on the future, and be willing to change after you seek feedback. So, self-motivation. You want to keep your goals simple, keep good company, keep learning, stay positive. Don't overthink this stuff. This is where I think with engineers and scientists, you know, we can tend to overthink things. We've got to be careful about that with emotions. You got to feel it. Track your progress through journaling and help others. Here's an interesting one. If you want to become more empathetic, one way to do it is to learn about people. And one way to learn about people is to read more literature. You can read more literature. And then when you do listen, make sure you keep eye contact. It's very important. I try to teach my son this all the time. When you're talking with someone, maintain eye contact. That's very important. Good posture. Look alert. Look alive. If you need to drink coffee, do it. It is definitely good for establishing rapport and respect. Practice the platinum rule. Anybody know the platinum rule? The golden rule is do unto others as you would have others do unto you. The platinum rule is find out what others want and do that unto them. So that's like one step up from that. Find out what others want and do that unto them. Consider the value to the counterpart. This gets back to the business meeting when we've got 10 people in the room, we've got 5 different projects, 5 people have spoken up, each for a mutually exclusive, separate project. Who's right? Consider the value to the counterparty. Try to figure out the reality test and work to be cooperative in a solution. Here's another thing that happens. When people speak up about what they believe in, when you open up and speak about it publicly, you then become more bought into it, and you're going to defend it more like a badger because you've stated it publicly. You've got to be careful of this because there's this fine line between looking wishy-washy, right, but being honest with yourself. What if new information became available from one of the other people that said, well, wait a minute, I thought of that too, but I decided to make the change in this way because it solves that other problem. Be okay with that. Learn to just open up and say, you know what, you're right. That's all right. I get that now. We can adopt that solution set. That's fine. That looks good when you do that, when you're able to open up like that and make a decision to change your mind in the face of new information. All right. Improving relationships. This is starting to become redundant a little bit, but we're almost done. Empathize, offer understanding. Here's something you can do, number 4. Offer your time and energy for a focused conversation in a relationship that you want to develop. Do this once a week at least. Give them your time and your undivided attention for a little bit of time once a week. It'll help out no matter who it is. Proactively check in. Not a response to a text message or a response to an email or a response to a phone call, but you actually proactively check in with your boss or with your colleagues or with your friends or whoever it is. And remember the words thank you and I'm sorry, and they mean them. Then when you plan activities, make sure you follow through on those plans. Some of this stuff seems like common sense, but it's so easy to mess up. You know, we're all human beings, and people they get into a rut. We can just kind of go on our own way. We forget to check in. So listen, open your mind, learn about yourself, think about how to carefully express your emotions well. Be humble, but be confident. Be decisive and careful. Focus on others, help people, and be sincere. Above all, do this with a heart of sincerity. And with that, I thank you very much, and I would open this up to questions if you guys have anything for me. Anybody have any questions? Now, I don't take offense to no questions at all. I don't care about that. But I will tell you, all right, hold on, I'll get you a second. I will tell you that, like when you guys have speakers and stuff, it's really good. And look, this is something you'll learn. So interesting story. I have trouble getting my MBA students and my undergrads to ask questions when speakers come. Whenever I go to my 10-year-old school, every single kid raises their hand because they have they're just not self-aware yet, I guess. So I'm going to hand the mic. Do you need the mic or not?
No.
Okay, what's up?
I just want to know why did you decide to go the MBA route and not get a master's in a mechanical engineering field?
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good question. So why did I want to do MBA, not engineering? Well, there was a time, I kept getting promoted. During that RIF 90s, I would get promoted while I watched colleagues get walked out. And I bumped around Indiana, Ohio, I ended up in Detroit. And at first I was signed, sealed, and delivered to go get an MBA at Notre Dame with my company going to pay for it. Then I was going to go to Butler, which is a school in Indianapolis, MBA again. I knew I needed to learn the language of business because working in a manufacturing company who made products that were going to be sold, to customers, it was a business, and so I wanted to learn that. At some point when I was in Michigan, I was going to go to the University of Michigan. They had an MSME/MBA degree. I was really excited about that, and our company got bought. So I wanted to do both at the time because I was excited about doing that program. It depends on what you want to do. If you want to do management, if you want to get into business, the MBA is definitely a good thing for you in the future. But if you want to be an engineer, you can get a lot of mileage out of furthering your education in that way too. So I didn't, I was just going on the path that was led before me at that time. Nobody has any questions about maybe the emotional periodic table? Help me get something out of that. All right, well, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. Have a great night.